Hey everybody, it's Vera Wylde. So it's been a little while since we've spoken, and I wanted to talk to you about something while it was still fresh in my head, because this happened only a few days from when I'm recording this. And it got me thinking a little bit about the way in which the LGBTQ plus and specifically transgender and trans ally community is attempting to deal with, let's go with gender critical movement folks, whatever we care to call them. Because I had a little bit of run-in's the wrong word, because that implies I had a direct confrontation. I didn't. But first of all, let's backtrack. Gender critical is the current euphemism being used to mask anti-trans thinking. Much like race realist is, or at least was, I'm not sure if it's still being used, but was a new euphemism to mask racist thinking. Gender critical tends to be associated with people who take a very hardline stance against trans women and move things in the direction of asserting that trans women are men attempting to invade feminine spaces, and so they will usually frame it as a women's safety issue, that trans women exist at all and are allowed in feminine spaces. I don't really want to deal with their arguments that they make. They are blatantly transphobic, and it's one of the biggest holes in all of this is the fact that you will pretty much never find a gender critical think piece that even addresses trans men. They ignore that trans men exist because it doesn't fit their narrative of trans people being somehow dangerous, only portraying trans women as dangerous men in dresses or potentially dangerous men in dresses fits their narrative, so they ignore the fact that trans men even exist. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because at this point, certainly within the community, gender critical is pretty well known as a euphemism, as what it is, as a smokescreen, as an attempt to mask anti-trans sentiment and movement and attempts to confine and undermine a populace under the guise of academic terminology. So the reason I'm bringing it up is I live in Vermont, which, while not a perfect state by any stretch, is decent, on the better end of things as far as states within the US when it comes to consideration of trans people. And again, not perfect. Areas still being worked on, but there are a lot of nice little touches. It's actually the law in Vermont that if a bathroom in a business or a public place is single occupancy, meaning it's a bathroom you go in and lock the door and you're the only one in there, as opposed to a row of stalls, it's actually the law that it has to be marked for all genders. And you don't get men's room, women's room when it's just one person going in and locking themselves in. That sounds like a minor thing, but it's thoughtful. It doesn't hurt anybody, and it's nice for folks like me. Similarly, there is now a gender X option on driver's licenses, which I actually intend to get when I get my license renewed later this year. And Vermont, just as a place, has a very live and let live, what you do doesn't hurt me, it's not my business kind of place. Apparently there is now a group in existence calling themselves Gender Critical Vermont And over this past weekend from when I'm recording this, I don't know when I'll get it out. So relatively recently from time of recording, they had arranged a sort of a public meeting, a discussion forum at a public library in Burlington, Vermont. Burlington, if you don't know, is the largest city in the state by a hefty margin. And when I found this out, my first reaction was rage. I won't lie. I will not pretend otherwise. I was angry. And before I even tell you how that panned out, I've come to realize that that is probably what this group wanted from me. And I'll skip to the end and then backfill. We need to be careful about having our anger at groups like this play into their hands. And so, as I said, when I found this out, I was very angry. Not so much at the gender critical group. Obviously, their very existence and certainly their intentions and their agenda frustrate me immensely, but I don't expect anything different from them. They can't disappoint me. Generally, if I'm angry, there's disappointment as a factor. People say I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. No, I'm angry because I'm disappointed is a bit more how it tends to go with me. So I was very angry at the library because there was no way that they couldn't know what this group was doing, what they were there for. They couldn't claim ignorance. The description of the event very blatantly said that it was there to discuss how the transgender agenda is harmful to women, and it openly invited everyone except trans people to attend. It was very upfront about what it was doing. And I was very upset at the library for granting them a platform. And I wrote to the library, I wrote an email. I never got a response back. I was as polite as I could manage in that email. I didn't swear. I swore a lot in conversations with people and friends venting that weekend, but I didn't swear in the email. But I did express my dismay and my intention to not patronize that library in future, which is an actual threat for me because I would take my daughter to that library if they allowed this group to meet there. And you need to realize that this group's existence and its intentions went against even the stated mission of the library. So it really got to me. The library did not cancel that event. They actually issued a statement. And while I don't love the statement, because I actually think it dodges around condemning what this group was there to do, I feel that it should have, but it didn't. But it did explain that their presence there was something that the library couldn't control, and that the policies around the use of the library's public spaces meant that they couldn't bar them. And I also had additional insight into this because my partner is a librarian. She's a school librarian as opposed to the public library system, but she has colleagues who work in that. She knows the head of libraries in Vermont. So through her insight, I also knew that in Vermont, I don't think it was at that specific library, but there had been a library in Vermont that had barred I believe it was a white nationalist group from holding a discussion meeting on their grounds, and that decision got challenged and the library lost. So there was precedent for this library to believe that if they tried to bar the gender critical discussion from their premises, that they would lose, that it would get challenged and they would lose. And so the statement did indicate that the library basically had its hands tied and it would be allowed to move forward. Here's the thing though. Rather soon after that, the event was canceled by the organizers. And I found myself asking, why would they cancel? They weren't being stopped from holding it. Why would they cancel it themselves? One might think initially, there was all this heavy backlash, and it was more than they thought, except that groups like this, they know the backlash they're going to get. They account for it. And actually, in this case, I think they were counting on it. I believe, I'm fairly certain, that the reason they booked a room at that library in a town and a state that is very liberally minded was with the intention of getting a response angry enough that they would be told they couldn't go there, and then to challenge that, and then to fight that, and then to go to the press with our right to assemble is being infringed upon, and people won't let us meet. But once that wasn't going to be the case, once they weren't actually going to be stopped, they canceled the event. Because it was never about the event. They wanted the press, but the only way they were going to get the press is if they were fought. And while if it had gone forward, there probably would have been, say, counter-protests outside, nobody was stopping them. There was no fight, which meant there was no publicity, which meant there was no benefit from them holding it anymore. I learned something really valuable in this, and that is to be careful about letting my anger play into the hands of people who are counting on an angry response. I think the reason that liberally minded folks, trans allies, can fall into this trap is because for a long time we felt like we were ignored and silent. And so over the last, decade and a half, I've seen this community, and I felt it in myself, that we found our voice. And we are able to say, you can't ignore us anymore. You can't pretend like we don't exist. We are here, and we will not be silent. And that had strength. That was an important thing. But the people who don't like trans people, they now know we're not going to be silent. And so now they're banking on what our reaction will be, which is not silence. So there are going to be occasions when probably the best thing that we can do, and I say this largely on a local level, but is ignore them. Now we have to be careful. That's not a blanket statement. It's not always ignore them and they'll go away. No, I mean, they're not just going to go away. They have something they want to accomplish. They'll keep at it. But this was a case where it was demonstrated to me that their plans entirely hinged on a big public fight. And when it didn't happen, they left. Be careful about riding off your anger and propelling forward on the strength and momentum of rage. Because while anger can fuel great things, it can also be easy to predict and easy to set a trap for. And it's funny because I know that on some level, because I deal with that in my comments section. Whether it's here or on Council of Geeks, I deal with a fair amount of comments that are not pleasant. And I almost never respond to them, even if they make me angry. And I need to remember that even taking out of the digital space, that sometimes what they want more than anything else is my anger, because their next step depends on it. And so the best move I can make is to not give them my anger. I needed to learn that in a setting outside of YouTube comments. And I'm hoping it's a lesson I'll take forward, and I hope it's one that by sharing it, allies and friends and trans people of all stripes will keep in mind sometimes what they want from us is for us to try and stop them. And sometimes, as much as we all wish they would go away, sometimes the best thing that we can do is just pretend like they're not there. We can still debunk their nonsense and their hate without engaging them. We can talk past them. We don't need to engage with them, and we don't need to try and prevent them from gathering, because there's a good chance that's what they want. So that was my experience. That was my lesson. Something I hope to take on board, because as is becoming readily apparent every day, I've still got a lot to learn. I'm still changing, and this is one more thing I can take on board. Thank you for listening. You are beautiful. You are loved. You are valid.